They killed him in cold blood. His own brother. His trusted allies. Everyone he had ever loved turned against him in a single, devastating moment. But death wasn't the end for Cale Ashford. When he opened his eyes again, he possessed something. That would make every single one of them regret ever crossing him. The ability to become anyone, to wear any face, to infiltrate any stronghold. And most importantly, the power to destroy them all from the inside out. This is the story of a man who lost everything, only to return with the ultimate weapon of deception. But before we dive into the shadows of revenge, let me take you back to where it all began. To a kingdom where bloodlines meant everything and where one young man's world was about to shatter into a million pieces. The Ashford family had ruled the eastern territories of the Valdran Empire for 7 generations. Their ancestral home, Blackstone Keep, rose from the mist-covered mountains like a jagged crown of dark stone. The fortress was massive, sprawling across 3 mountaintops connected by ancient bridges of enchanted stone. Its walls had never been breached in over 400 years of recorded history. For centuries, the Ashfords had been the Empire's shield against the monster hordes that emerged from the Abyssal Rift, earning them the title of the Rift Guardians. The position came with immense prestige and equally immense responsibility. Every generation in Ashford had to prove their worth by participating in the hunts that kept the monsters at bay. Those who failed were quietly removed from the line of succession. Those who succeeded became legends. Cale was the eldest son, the heir, the one who was supposed to carry on the family legacy. But from the day he was born, something was different about him. The midwife who delivered him noted a strange birthmark on his lower back, a swirling pattern of silver lines that seemed to shift when looked at directly. She mentioned it to the Duchess, who immediately went pale and demanded that no one speak of it again. That birthmark was the first sign. The first indication that Cale was born was something his family feared more than any monster from the Rift, while his younger brother Damien awakened his aura at the tender age of 12, surrounded by family members who cheered and celebrated his accomplishment. Cale remained powerless. Year after year passed and still no spark of magical energy manifested within him. His 15th birthday came and went without the awakening ceremony that every noble child experienced. Then his 16th. His 17th. The whispers started early. Servants who thought they were being discreet. Nobles at court functions who hid their laughter behind raised fans and wine glasses. Even the common soldiers stationed at Blackstone Keep began to look at him differently. With pity, with contempt, with the casual cruelty that humans reserve for those they consider beneath them. His father, Duke Aldrich Ashford, grew increasingly disappointed. Where once he had bounced young Cale on his knee and spoken of the great deeds they would accomplish together, now he could barely look at his eldest son. Dinner conversations became exercises in endurance. Cale would sit in silence while his father praised Damien's latest achievement, his eyes sliding past his firstborn as if he were furniture. The Duke was a hard man, forged by decades of fighting monsters and navigating court politics. He had little patience for weakness, and in his mind, Cale's failure to awaken was the ultimate weakness. A son without aura was no son at all. Just a biological accident that happened to share his blood. But Cale never gave up. He trained harder than anyone else. While other noble children slept until noon, he was in the training yard at dawn, practicing sword forms until his arms burned and his hands bled. He studied ancient texts until his eyes burned, searching for any technique or ritual that might force his dormant abilities to awaken. He pushed his body beyond its limits, running the mountain paths until his lungs screamed for mercy, lifting weights until his muscles tore and healed and grew stronger. Through all of it, he believed in one thing above all else. The love of his family would see him through. They might be disappointed now, but once he proved himself, once he showed them what he could accomplish through sheer determination, everything would be different. His brother Damien was his closest confidant, or so Cale believed. They had grown up together, shared secrets in whispered midnight conversations, fought imaginary battles in the castle corridors with wooden swords. Damien was 3 years younger, but he had always looked up to Cale. Or at least, that's what Cale thought. In truth, Damien had resented Cale from the moment he understood what being an heir meant. Why should his worthless brother inherit everything simply because he was born first? Why should Damien, who was stronger, faster, and actually possessed magical ability, be forced into a supporting role? Every compliment Kale received, every small success he achieved, burned in Damien's heart like acid. But Damien was smart enough to hide his feelings. He played the role of loyal younger brother perfectly. Always there with a supportive word, always defending Kale against those who mocked him. It was all an act, a careful performance designed to position himself for the moment when Kale inevitably failed. When the other noble children mocked Kale for being talentless, Damien was always there to defend him. But those defenses were carefully crafted to seem heroic while subtly reinforcing everyone's perception of Kale as someone who needed defending. Someone weak. Someone pathetic. His fiancée, Lady Sarah Valen, had been promised to him since childhood. Their union would merge two of the Empire's most powerful families. The Valens controlled the Empire's largest trading consortium, while the Ashfords controlled the Eastern Territories. Together, they would form an economic and military alliance that could reshape the balance of power across the entire continent. Sarah was beautiful, with hair the color of autumn leaves and eyes that sparkled like polished emeralds. She was clever too, educated in the finest academies the Empire offered, capable of holding her own in debates with seasoned politicians and scholars, and she was kind, or seemed to be. She never once looked at Kale with the contempt that others showed. She told him that power didn't matter, that she loved him for who he was. Those conversations were some of Kale's happiest memories. Walking through the castle gardens as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Sierra's hand in his, her voice soft as she spoke about their future together. The children they would have. The house they would build. The life they would share. And Kale, foolish, trusting Kale, believed every word. What he didn't know was that Sierra had been in contact with his father since she was 15 years old. Duke Aldrich had recognized her ambition immediately and cultivated it carefully. He needed someone inside Kale's confidence, someone who could report on his activities and ensure he remained controllable. Sierra was perfect for the role. She didn't love Kale. She didn't even particularly like him. But she was willing to play the part because Duke Aldrich had promised her something far more valuable than a loveless marriage to a powerless heir. He had promised her that when the time came, when Kale was removed from the succession, she would be free to marry whomever she chose. With the full support of the Ashford family. Her first choice, naturally, was Damien. The future Duke. The one with actual power. Even his own mother, Duchess Helena, seemed to support him. She would stroke his hair and tell him that his time would come. That some flowers bloomed later than others. But when they did, they outshone all the rest. Her voice was always gentle, her touch always soft, her words always encouraging. But those hands that stroked his hair also measured the silver drops she added to his food each morning. The encouragement was designed to keep him docile, content, unsuspecting. The kindness was a mask worn by a woman who had murdered children before Kale was even born. Helena's history was a closely guarded secret, known only to her husband and a handful of others. Before she became a duchess, she was known by another name, the Silver Serpent, one of the most feared assassins in the Midnight Serpents Guild. She had killed nobles, merchants, even a minor king. Her body count numbered in the hundreds before she was approached by agents of the Ashford family with a proposition. The mark of 1,000 faces appeared randomly in the Ashford bloodline, roughly once every 500 years. The family had protocols for dealing with potential carriers. Previous generations had simply killed the marked children at birth, but the current Duke's father had a different idea. What if, instead of killing them, they could be controlled? Suppressed? Used? Helena was hired to infiltrate the family, bear children, and ensure that any who showed signs of the mark would be neutralized. Her marriage to Aldrich wasn't love. It was a contract, paid for in gold and political favors. When she saw the birthmark on baby Kale's back, she began her work immediately. The silver drops were a specialized toxin, designed to suppress the manifestation of bloodline abilities. It wouldn't kill him, wouldn't even make him sick. It would simply ensure that he remained ordinary, powerless, and ultimately disposable. Looking back now, From a vantage point of experience and bitter wisdom, Kale could see all the signs he had missed. The secret meetings between Damien and their father that always seemed to happen when Kale was occupied elsewhere. The way Sierra's smile never quite reached her eyes when they were alone. The convenient timing of his mother's affection always appearing after particularly difficult days, keeping him hopeful and pliant, but at the time, he saw none of it. He was too busy trying to prove himself, too focused on becoming worthy of the family that was actively working to destroy him. The day everything changed started like any other. Kale woke before dawn, performed his morning exercises and made his way to the training yard as the first rays of sunlight crept over the mountain peaks. The air was crisp with autumn's bite, carrying the scent of wood smoke and distant pine. He was practicing his sword work against one of the castle guards, a grizzled veteran named Marcus who had served the family for 30 years. Marcus was one of the few people in Blackstone Keep who treated Kale with genuine respect. Not because of his status, but because he had seen the young lord's dedication, his refusal to give up despite everything working against him. Their blades danced through the morning mist, steel ringing against steel in a rhythm that Kale found almost meditative. He had become exceptionally skilled with a blade, even without aura to enhance his movements. Pure technique, honed through thousands of hours of practice. It was the one thing no one could take from him, or so he thought. Messenger arrived at mid-morning, his horse lathered and gasping from a hard ride. The news he carried was urgent enough that Duke Aldrich called an immediate gathering of all family members and senior staff. Creatures from the abyssal rift had been spotted near the eastern border. Not the usual mindless beasts that occasionally wandered through the weakened barriers, but something far more dangerous. A Voidwalker had emerged, a creature that hadn't been seen in over 300 years. The last Voidwalker had killed over 2,000 soldiers before it was finally brought down by a combined force of 6 noble houses. It had taken an entire year to hunt, and the landscape it had crossed remained corrupted and barren to this day. Duke Aldrich immediately began organizing a hunting party. His face was grim but eager. This was an opportunity, he explained to the gathered nobles and knights. A chance to demonstrate the strength of the Ashford family. A chance to remind the Empire why they guarded the rift. The entire family would participate. It was tradition, he said. A chance for the Ashfords to demonstrate their power to the Empire. A chance for every member of the bloodline to prove their worth. Then he turned to Kale, and his expression softened slightly. A chance for you to finally prove yourself. Kale should have been suspicious. His father had never before included him in important hunts. When creatures needed to be dealt with, Kale was always left behind, tasked with managing household affairs, while the real warriors rode out to face danger. This sudden inclusion was completely out of character, but hope is a powerful drug, and Kale had been starving for it his entire life. He saw what he wanted to see, a father finally giving him a chance, an opportunity to earn the respect he had always craved. A moment that could change everything. The trap had been set perfectly. They rode out at dawn the next day, 50 of the kingdom's finest warriors at their backs. The column stretched nearly a quarter-mile down the mountain road, armor gleaming. In the early morning light, banners snapping in the wind. Kale rode near the front beside his brother, feeling for the first time in years like he truly belonged. The journey to the abyssal rift took 3 days, through treacherous mountain passes, where a single misstep could send a horse and rider plummeting hundreds of feet into rocky darkness. They crossed forests so dense that sunlight barely penetrated the canopy, where ancient trees loomed like silent sentinels and strange sounds echoed from depths that no one had ever explored. Damien was unusually quiet during the journey. Normally, he was full of stories and jokes, keeping the soldiers' spirits high with his natural charisma. But now he rode in silence, his eyes distant, his responses to Kale's attempts at conversation brief and distracted. When Kale asked if something was wrong, his brother just smiled and said he was preparing himself mentally for the battle ahead, focusing his aura, centering his thoughts. Kale accepted this explanation without question. Why wouldn't he? Damien had never given him reason to doubt. Had always been there for him. Had always been his closest friend in a world that seemed determined to push him away. The abyssal rift was a scar upon the land, a massive chasm that descended into absolute darkness. It was over a mile wide at its broadest point and extended for nearly 50 miles through the mountains. No one knew how deep it went. Those who had tried to explore its depths had never returned. Strange energies swirled within its darkness, visible as faint purple and silver currents that moved against all natural wind patterns. The air around it felt heavy, oppressive, carrying a taste like copper and rotting flowers. Standing at its edge, Kale could feel something watching him from below. Something ancient and hungry, aware of his presence in ways that made his skin crawl. The camp was established a safe distance from the rift's edge, on a plateau that offered good defensive positions. Scouts were sent to track the Voidwalkers' movements while the main force rested and prepared for the engagement to come. That night, gathered around the command tent's tactical table, they planned their approach. The Voidwalker had been spotted moving north, following the rift's edge toward a narrow point where the chasm was barely 100 feet wide. If they could engage it there, they could limit its ability to retreat back into the darkness. Aldrich laid out the battle formations with the ease of long experience. Heavy infantry in the center, cavalry on the flanks, archers and mages providing support from elevated positions. Standard monster hunting protocol, modified for the specific threat they faced. And Kale, he said, pausing as all eyes turned to the eldest son. You'll be in the vanguard, right beside your brother. The tent went silent. Everyone knew what being in the vanguard meant. It was the position of greatest honor, but also greatest danger. The first to engage the enemy, the first to face death. Kale felt his heart swell with pride. Finally, his father was giving him the chance he deserved. Finally, he would stand beside his brother as an equal, not as a burden to be protected. Thank you. Father, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I won't let you down. Duke Aldrich's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Something that, had Kale been more suspicious, he might have recognized as satisfaction of an entirely different kind. I know you won't. The Voidwalker emerged just as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. It came, not from the rift itself, but from a cave system that connected to the chasm's depths. A route that had been deliberately left unguarded. It was unlike anything Kale had ever seen or imagined. A creature of shadow and malice, its form constantly shifting, defying the laws of reality itself. One moment it appeared vaguely humanoid, towering 30 feet tall. The next it was a writhing mass of tentacles and eyes. Then something with too many legs and teeth. Always changing, never stable, impossible to focus on for more than a few seconds. Where it walked, the ground withered and died. Grass turned to ash. Stone cracked and crumbled. The very air around it seemed to darken, light itself being devoured by its impossible presence. The soldiers who had been so confident just hours ago now trembled in their formations. Some of them had fought monsters before, had faced down creatures that would have driven ordinary men to madness, but this was different. This was something that shouldn't exist, something that violated the fundamental rules of the natural world. Duke Aldrich's voice cut through the mounting panic, sharp and commanding. Hold your positions. Remember your training. We have faced darkness before, and we will face it again. The battle was chaos. Warriors who had trained their entire lives were cut down in seconds, their auras doing little to protect them from the creature's reality-warping attacks. A knight in full plate armor simply ceased to exist, erased from reality with a casual gesture of the Voidwalker's ever-changing appendages. An entire squad of archers found their arrows turning to dust. Before they could reach their target, Kale fought with everything he had. His blade found gaps in the monster's defenses that others couldn't see, sliding through the shifting darkness to strike something solid within. Without the crutch of magical power, he had learned to read his opponents in ways that aura users never developed. He watched the patterns in the chaos, anticipated the creature's movements, found openings that existed for only fractions of a second. He saved 3 soldiers who would have died, pulling them away from attacks they never saw coming. He distracted the creature at a crucial moment, allowing a group of cavalry to retreat from a hopeless position. He did everything that anyone could ask of a warrior and more. And then, impossibly, his sword connected with something solid within the creature's shifting mass. The impact jarred his arm all the way to the shoulder, but he didn't let go. He pushed harder, twisted the blade, felt it sink into something vital. The Voidwalker screamed, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once that echoed in dimensions that human ears were never meant to perceive. Black blood, if it could even be called that, splattered across Kale's face. It burned like acid, but he didn't flinch. For one glorious moment, Kale thought he had done it. He had struck. A blow that no one else could manage. He had proven himself. He had finally become worthy. That was when he felt the blade pierce his back. The pain was immediate and absolute, wiping away everything else. Kale looked down in confusion at the sword point emerging from his chest. The blade was familiar. He had seen it 1,000 times before. It was his brother's sword. The one that had been gifted to Damien on his 16th birthday. The one with the distinctive blue steel edge and the Ashford crest engraved on the crossguard. Kale turned his head, slowly, each movement sending waves of agony through his impaled body. And there was Damien, his face twisted into an expression that Kale had never seen before. Hatred. Pure, undiluted hatred, burning in eyes that had once looked at him with affection. Why? The word came out as a whisper, barely audible over the sounds of battle still raging around them. Blood filled his mouth, hot and copper-tasting. Damien leaned close, his lips nearly touching Kale's ear. You were never supposed to be the heir. You were never supposed to have anything. You're nothing but a mistake, brother. A stain on our family's legacy. A worthless piece of garbage that should have been disposed of at birth. And now, you're going to be the tragic hero who died fighting the Voidwalker. More blades found Kale's body. His father's trusted knights, men who had watched him grow up, who had pretended to respect him, drove their swords into his flesh without hesitation. Each wound was precise, calculated to cause maximum pain without killing him immediately. They wanted him to suffer. Kale collapsed to his knees, his blood pooling beneath him, mixing with the corrupted soil of the rift's edge. The world was going gray at the edges, reality itself seeming to fade through dimming vision. He saw his father watching from a distance. There was no grief in Duke Aldrich's eyes, no regret. Only cold calculation, the look of a man watching a minor problem being solved. And beside him stood Ciro, her hand resting on the Duke's arm, her beautiful face showing nothing but bored indifference. She yawned slightly, as if watching something tedious, then turned to whisper something in the Duke's ear that made them both smile. His mother appeared in his fading sight. She walked through the chaos of battle as if protected by some invisible force, the fighting parting around her like water around a stone. She knelt before him, cupping his face in her hands. Such a shame, she murmured, her voice soft with mock sympathy. You really tried so hard. All those years of training, of hoping, of believing. You never had a chance, but you never stopped trying. In a way, it's almost admirable. But some bloodlines are simply meant to end. She pushed him. Kale fell backward, over the edge of the abyssal rift, descending into darkness so complete that it swallowed even his screams. He fell for what felt like an eternity. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light. It was a living thing, pressing against him, invading him, filling every part of his being. He felt his body breaking apart, his wounds expanding as reality itself rejected his presence. His very essence was being scattered across dimensions. Time lost meaning. In that endless fall. Minutes could have been hours, hours could have been years. There was nothing but darkness and pain and the fading memories of betrayal. And then, just as he was certain that oblivion had finally claimed him, something spoke. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. It was more like a thought that wasn't his own. An impression pressed directly into his shattered consciousness. The darkness recognized something within him. Something that had been hidden, suppressed, denied for his entire existence. All your life they kept you weak. All your life they feared what you might become. Kale couldn't respond. He barely existed anymore. He was just scattered fragments of pain and betrayal, drifting through an endless void. They poisoned you. They manipulated you. They took everything from you. But there is one thing they couldn't steal. One thing that has been waiting, sleeping, growing stronger with every passing year. The thing they feared most of all. Images flooded Kale's mind. Memories he didn't remember forming. His mother adding drops of silver liquid to his morning tea. His father meeting with dark-robed figures in the castle's hidden chambers. Ancient texts describing a bloodline ability, so rare and so powerful that entire kingdoms had been destroyed to prevent its awakening. The mark of the 1,000 faces it was said that once every millennium, a member of the Ashford bloodline would be born with this gift. The ability to absorb and replicate the physical form of any being they encountered. Not an illusion, not a disguise, but a true transformation down to the very last detail. Including their skills, including their memories, including their power. The last person to bear this mark had lived 500 years before Cale's birth. A man named Varan Ashford, who had discovered his ability in his 20s and proceeded to use it to conquer half the known world in less than a decade. He wore the faces of kings and generals, infiltrated enemy strongholds wearing the appearance of trusted allies, and built an empire that spanned 3 continents. His own generals had eventually poisoned him, terrified of what he had become, of the knowledge that he could become any of them at will. The coalition that formed to bring him down included every major power of his era, united by their shared fear of a man who could be anyone. After his death, the Ashford family developed protocols for identifying and eliminating any future carriers of the mark. The bloodline ability was simply too dangerous to allow to manifest. Better to kill a few innocent children than risk another VAREN. Your family knew. They knew from the moment you were born. They saw the mark appear on your back when you were just an infant, the swirling silver lines that marked you as a potential carrier. And they spent your entire life ensuring it would never awaken. Cale's consciousness began to coalesce. The darkness was rebuilding him piece by piece, using the very essence of the void itself to restore what had been destroyed. But something was different now. Something fundamental had shifted. But here, in the depths of the abyss, their poisons cannot reach you. Here, the seal they placed on you holds no power. The silver toxin in your blood has been purged, burned away by the corrupted energies that surround you. For the first time in your entire life, you are truly yourself. Pain, more intense than anything he had experienced, tore through his reforming body. He felt something shifting beneath his skin, something that had been chained for 23 years finally breaking free. It was like a dam bursting, a flood of power that had been building for decades finally finding release. Awaken, child of shadows. Awaken and take your revenge. Cale screamed, and his scream echoed through the infinite darkness of the abyss. His body twisted, changed, became something else entirely. He felt power flooding into him, power that had been stolen, power that was rightfully his. When the agony finally subsided, Cale opened his eyes to find himself lying on cold stone. The darkness still surrounded him, but it no longer felt oppressive. It felt welcoming, natural, like coming home after a long journey. He sat up slowly, examining his hands. They looked the same as always, but he could feel the difference. Something coiled beneath his skin, waiting, eager. A potential that had always been there, now finally unlocked. He thought about his mother. About the last face he had seen before falling. About the cruel satisfaction in her eyes as she pushed him to his death. The change was instantaneous. His skin rippled like water disturbed by a stone. His bones shifted, lengthened in some places and compressed in others. His entire body reshaped itself in ways that should have been impossible, that should have been agonizing, but instead felt as natural as breathing. When he looked at his reflection in a pool of dark water nearby, his mother's face stared back at him, perfect in every detail, down to the slight crease between her eyebrows that appeared when she was scheming, down to the thin scar on her left cheek that she had always told him was from a childhood accident but was actually from a blade fight with a rival assassin. But it wasn't just appearance. He could feel her memories pressing against his consciousness, partial, fragmented, absorbed from the moment she had touched his face before pushing him. He knew the techniques she had learned as a young assassin before marrying into the Ashford family. The pressure points that could paralyze or kill with a single touch. The art of slow, undetectable poison. The secrets she had kept hidden for decades. Cale shifted back to his original form, his mind racing with possibilities. This was his gift. This was what they had feared so much that they were willing to murder their own son to prevent it. And now it was his. How long had he been in this abyss? How much time had passed in the world above? He had no way of knowing, but something told him it hadn't been long. Perhaps days. Perhaps weeks at most. Time moves differently in the void. The voice was back, but fainter now, as if whatever entity had awakened him was expending the last of its energy. Those who enter the abyss rarely leave. The darkness consumes them, absorbs them, makes them part of itself. But you are different. The mark allows you to absorb more than just faces. You can absorb the essence of this place itself. You can take its power and use it as your own. Kale didn't fully understand, but instinct guided him. He reached out with his newly awakened senses and felt the abyss around him. It was a dimension unto itself, a realm of infinite darkness and endless possibility. He pulled at it, drew it into himself, felt it settle into his core like a second heart. And suddenly he could see a way out. A tear in the fabric of reality, leading back to the world he had been cast from. It pulsed with dim light, beckoning him forward. Go, child of shadows. Become anyone. Destroy everything. Let them know what it means to fear the one they betrayed. Kale rose to his feet and walked toward the light. He emerged from the abyss 3 weeks after his supposed death. The tear deposited him in the depths of the Thornwood Forest, miles from Blackstone Keep. According to a calendar he found in an abandoned hunter's cabin, only 21 days had passed since the battle at the Rift. 21 days. In that time, his family had surely declared him dead, mourned him publicly while celebrating privately, begun the process of transferring his inheritance to Damien. They thought they had won. They thought he was gone forever. They were so very wrong. Kale spent the following weeks learning to control his newfound abilities. The transformation came naturally now, as easy as moving a limb, but he needed to understand its limits. He discovered that he needed physical contact to absorb a new form. Just a touch was enough, though prolonged contact provided more detailed access to memories and skills. The forms he absorbed became part of him permanently, stored in some inner repository that he could access at will. He also discovered limitations. He couldn't become anything larger or smaller than his natural mass would allow, roughly plus or minus 20%. He couldn't absorb non-humanoid creatures, though he suspected this limit might be breakable with practice. And each transformation required energy that replenished over time but could be depleted if he shifted too frequently. His first test subject was a bandit who made the unfortunate choice to attack a seemingly unarmed traveler on a forest road. The man was large and scarred, clearly experienced in violence. He probably expected easy pickings. What he got was Kale's hand on his face, a brief moment of confusion, and then darkness. The transformation felt natural, like slipping on a well-worn cloak. Kale became the bandit, complete with his rough voice, his crooked teeth, and his intimate knowledge of the local criminal underworld. The memories were fascinating. This man had been a soldier once before desertion and desperation drove him to banditry. He knew the roads, the hidden camps, the other criminals who operated in the area. Information that could be useful. Kale disposed of the body and continued on his way. Now wearing a different face. News traveled slowly in the Empire, but eventually, Kale learned what had happened after his fall into the abyss. The official story was that Kale Ashford had died a hero's death, sacrificing himself to weaken the Voidwalker so that his younger brother could deliver the killing blow. Damien was now heir to the duchy, his position secured by public acclaim and imperial recognition. He was also engaged to Lady Sira Valen. The wedding was set for 3 months from now. The Emperor himself had sent a personal letter of condolence to the Ashford family, praising Kale's bravery and sacrifice. There were plans for a memorial, a statue to be erected in the capital depicting the fallen hero in his final moment of glory. Duke Aldrich had never looked prouder. His speeches about his eldest son's courage were masterfully crafted, full of apparent grief and fatherly love. Those who didn't know the truth saw a man devastated by loss but finding strength in his remaining son. Duchess Helena had made a public show of grieving, wearing black veils and shedding tears at memorial services. She had apparently collapsed during the funeral ceremony and had to be carried out. Overwhelmed by emotion, the Empire mourned the loss of a young hero while celebrating the rise of the true Ashford heir. They had erased him, turned his murder into a convenient narrative, stolen his legacy and his future in one calculated stroke. Kale felt something cold settle in his chest. Not rage, not anymore. That had burned itself out during his time in the abyss. What remained was something harder, something sharper. Purpose. They thought they had won. They thought he was gone forever. They were wrong. Over the following months, Kale began building his arsenal. He traveled the empire, wearing different faces, becoming different people. Each touch added to his collection gave him new skills. New knowledge, new identities to wear. He became a wandering mercenary who had fought in the border wars. A scarred veteran with 100 stories of battles and bloodshed. From him, Kale gained battlefield tactics and the grim practicality of professional soldiers. He became a nobleman from a minor house with extensive connections at court. A social butterfly who knew everyone's secrets and never paid for his own drinks. From him, Kale gained an understanding of court politics and the subtle dance of noble society. He became a servant from Blackstone Keep, who had recently been dismissed for a minor infraction, a bitter man who knew every secret passage. In the castle, every guard rotation, every hidden entrance. From him, Kale gained intimate knowledge of his former home. He became a guard captain who had trained with Damien personally, a man who knew his brother's fighting style better than almost anyone. From him, Kale gained the ability to predict Damien's moves in combat. Each face was a tool. Each identity was a weapon. And Kale wielded them with the patience of a man who knew that revenge was best served cold. But faces alone wouldn't be enough. He needed real power, combat ability that could match the aura-enhanced warriors of the nobility. His family had suppressed his abilities, but they hadn't been able to touch his natural intelligence and determination. He sought out masters in every discipline, wearing appropriate faces and telling appropriate lies. A retired blade saint living in seclusion taught him techniques that had been lost for generations. The old man believed he was training a promising young knight who had traveled far to seek instruction. Kale absorbed his face before leaving, adding centuries of sword mastery to his arsenal. The Shadow Guild that operated in the Empire's criminal underworld taught him assassination arts, the techniques of silent killing and invisible movement. They thought he was a disgraced noble seeking new employment for his skills. He absorbed their best assassin before severing ties. A disgraced court mage who had been exiled for Forbidden's experiments taught him aura manipulation, the same techniques that his brother had learned but he had always been denied. The mage thought he was helping a fellow outcast. Kale left him, alive, but wiped his memory of their encounter. Each teacher saw a different face, received a different story. They never knew that their most dedicated student was the same person. They never suspected that their techniques were being collected, combined, refined into something entirely new. By the time winter arrived, Kale had transformed from a betrayed victim into something far more dangerous. He was no longer just a shapeshifter. He was a collector of power, an amalgamation of countless skills and abilities, wearing whatever face served his purpose best. And now, finally, he was ready to begin his true work. His first target was not his family. That would have been too obvious, too easily traced. Instead, he started at the edges with those who had supported his murder but would not be immediately connected to him. Sir Roderick Crane had been among the knights who drove their blades into Kale's body. He was a minor nobleman, ambitious and cruel, who had attached himself to Duke Aldrich years ago in hopes of advancement. After Kale's death, he had been rewarded with a prosperous estate near the capital. Kale came to him wearing the face of a traveling merchant, seeking shelter on a cold night. Sir Roderick, eager to play the generous host in front of his household, welcomed the stranger warmly. Over dinner, Kale kept his host engaged in conversation about recent events at court. Sir Roderick, several cups of wine into the evening, grew boastful. He hinted at his role in the Voidwalker hunt, at the favor he had earned from Duke Aldrich, at the bright future that awaited him. "Does it ever bother you?" Kale asked, his voice casual, curious. "What happened to the young Lord Kale? I heard he died quite terribly." Sir Roderick laughed, the sound carrying a cruel edge that he probably thought was charming. Between us, he leaned forward conspiratorially. The brat had it coming. Always moping about, pretending to be something he wasn't. The family is better off without him. When the household retired for the night, Kale crept through the corridors wearing the face of a servant he had touched earlier. That evening, he made his way to Sir Roderick's chambers. where the knight lay in wine-soaked slumber. Kale leaned close, his transformed features rippling back to his original face, the face of a dead man. Sir Roderick's eyes snapped open. Recognition flooded. Them, followed immediately by terror. He opened his mouth to scream, but Kale's hand was already over it. "You remember me," Kale whispered. "Good. I wanted the last thing you see to be the face of the man you helped murder." He used one of the techniques. He had absorbed a pressure point strike that stopped the heart instantly and left no marks. Sir Roderick died with his eyes wide open, still staring at the impossible. Kale left no evidence. When they found the body in the morning, it appeared to be natural causes. A tragic death, the physicians concluded. Perhaps too much wine had strained the heart. One by one, Kale eliminated the knights who had participated in his betrayal. Each death was different, tailored to the individual. Some appeared to be accidents, falls from horses or drownings during hunts. Others were attributed to illness, fevers that struck suddenly and could not be treated. A few were blamed on violence from unknown assailants. Robberies gone wrong in dangerous parts of the city. He never killed with his original face again after Roderick. That would have been sloppy, and Kale was anything but sloppy. With each death, he felt something ease within him. Not satisfaction exactly, but a sense of balance being restored, of debts being paid. These men had been willing participants in his murder. They had driven their blades into his body without hesitation, expecting reward and advancement. They deserved everything they received, but they were just the appetizers. The main course was still to come. 3 months after his supposed death, Kale returned to the capital for the first time. He wore the face of a young nobleman named Corvin Marsh, the second son of a minor house who had recently arrived to seek his fortune at court. The real Corvin was currently enjoying an extended voyage across the western seas. Unaware that someone had borrowed his identity, the capital was everything Kale remembered. Grand buildings of white stone, their spires reaching toward heaven, like prayers made physical. Streets bustling with merchants and nobles, beggars and soldiers, all the diverse humanity of the empire's greatest city. The imperial palace rose above it all like a monument to power, its golden domes catching the light and scattering it across the Citoysia. He had visited many times as a child, always in his father's shadow, always ignored by the glittering aristocracy, who couldn't be bothered to notice a powerless heir now. He walked among them as one of their own. The wedding of Damien Ashford and Sarah Vallon was the social event of the season. Every major noble house had sent representatives, each trying to outdo the others with the magnificence of their gifts and the splendor of their entourages. The emperor himself had promised to attend, a signal of the imperial court's approval. Of the union, it would be a celebration of triumph, a hero's reward, a new beginning for the Ashford dynasty. Kale intended to turn it into something quite different. He had spent weeks preparing, laying groundwork that no one could see. He had absorbed faces that would give him access to every level of the celebration. Servants who worked in the cathedral where the ceremony would be held. Guards who would patrol the festivities. Nobles who would attend as honored guests. Even one of the priests who would perform the ceremony. He could become anyone, go anywhere, see everything. And no one would ever suspect that the pleasant young Lord Marsh was anything other than he seemed, but his goal wasn't to disrupt the wedding. Not yet. That would have been dramatic, but ultimately pointless. His family would survive a scandal, might even grow stronger from the sympathy it generated. Kale wanted more than disruption. He wanted destruction. Complete and absolute. He wanted his family not just defeated, but annihilated. Their legacy erased, their names spoken only as cautionary tales. First, he needed to understand the full scope of what he was facing. In the months since his death, his family had not been idle. Damien had grown stronger, trained relentlessly by the best masters in the Empire. His aura had solidified into something formidable, a blue-white energy that crackled around him during practice sessions. He was being groomed not just as an heir, but as a potential imperial champion. Sarah had been positioning herself within court politics, building alliances and gathering influence. She had a gift for it, an instinctive understanding of power dynamics and social maneuvering. Already she was being called the Velvet Spider by those who admired her skill and feared her ambition. Duke Aldrich had expanded his military forces and solidified his relationship with the Emperor. He had used Kale's heroic death to full advantage, leveraging the sympathy and respect it generated into increased political power. The Ashford family's position had never been stronger. And then there was his mother. Kale had discovered that Duchess Helena was far more than she appeared. Through careful investigation, wearing a dozen different faces, he had pieced together her true history. Before her marriage, she had been one of the Midnight Serpents, an order of elite assassins who served the highest bidder. Her body count numbered in the hundreds. Her specialty had been long-term infiltration, embedding herself in targets' households for months or years. Before striking, her wedding to Duke Aldrich had been carefully orchestrated to infiltrate the Ashford bloodline and ensure that any child born with the mark of 1,000 faces would be eliminated. She was still in contact with her old order, still had resources and connections that extended across the entire empire. She was, Kale realized, possibly more dangerous than his father. The wedding was held in the Grand Cathedral of the Sun, a massive structure of stained glass and soaring columns that had taken 300 years to build. Thousands of guests filled the pews, their jewels and silks creating a sea of wealth and privilege. Kale watched from a balcony reserved for minor nobles. Wearing Corvin's face and keeping his expression appropriately impressed. Damien stood at the altar, resplendent in ceremonial armor that had been forged specifically for this occasion. White gold and sapphires gleaming in the light that streamed through the stained glass windows. His aura was carefully controlled, held just beneath his skin, but Kale could see it pulsing with barely contained energy. He looked confident, triumphant. Every inch the hero the Empire believed him to be. When he smiled, it was the smile of a man who had everything he wanted. Kale remembered that smile from his final moments. It had looked very different then. Syrah descended the main aisle in a gown of white silk embroidered with golden thread. She was radiant, ethereal, a vision of noble beauty that made the guests murmur in approval as she passed. Her face showed joy and love and all the emotions expected of a bride. Kale felt nothing when he looked at her. Whatever love he had once harbored had died in the abyss along with his former self. Now she was simply another target, another piece on the board that needed to be removed. The ceremony proceeded without incident. Vows were exchanged, ancient words spoken by generations of nobles before them. Blessings were given by priests in golden robes. Rings were placed on fingers, symbols of an eternal bond that had been born from murder and deception. When the priest declared them husband and wife, the cathedral erupted in applause. Kale clapped along with everyone else, a small smile on his borrowed face. Let them have their moment, he thought. Let them believe they've won. The real work would begin tomorrow. Over the following months, Kale implemented his plan with methodical precision. He didn't attack his family directly. That would have been foolish, and they would have been prepared for it. Instead, he attacked everything around them. Their allies began to suffer misfortune. Business deals that should have been profitable collapsed at critical moments. Political maneuvers that should have succeeded backfired spectacularly. Scandals emerged from nowhere, perfectly timed to cause maximum damage. The network of support that the Ashfords had spent years building started to fray at the edges. Kale was everywhere and nowhere. He was the trusted advisor who delivered ruinous counsel, wearing the face of a man who had served loyally for decades. The servant who overheard secrets and sold them to rivals. The business partner who absconded with invested funds. The lover who whispered sweet nothings while extracting information. Wearing 100 different faces, he dismantled his family's power base piece by piece. But he wasn't just destroying. He was also building under various identities. He established connections with those who had reason to resent the Ashfords. Nobles who had been slighted by Duke Aldrich's arrogance. Merchants who had been cheated by Ashford business practices. Even commoners whose lands had been absorbed by the duchy's expansion. He gathered them carefully, revealed to each only what they needed to know, and forged them into a network of his own. A web of obligation and ambition, with himself at the center. Invisible and omnipresent. He also continued collecting abilities. A master archer who could hit targets at impossible distances, his eyes able to read wind and distance with supernatural precision. A tracker who could follow trails weeks old, reading the land like a book. An alchemist who knew poisons that could defeat even the most powerful healing magic. Each acquisition made him stronger. Each face he absorbed became another weapon in his arsenal. 6 months after the wedding, Damien Ashford began to notice that something was wrong. All eyes who had been loyal for years suddenly became distant. Resources that should have been available went missing. Intelligence that should have been accurate proved false at crucial moments. He sent investigators to uncover the source of his problems. They found nothing. Every trail led to dead ends or innocent parties. It was as if the very foundations of his power were being eaten away by invisible termites. Kale watched from the shadows, wearing the face of a stable hand as Damien raged in the courtyard of Blackstone. Someone is doing this deliberately. Damien shouted at his advisors. Someone is targeting our family. Find them and bring them to me. But how do you find someone who can be anyone? The pressure began to show. Damien grew paranoid, trusting no one, seeing enemies in every shadow. He executed 2 servants on suspicion of being spies. Neither was guilty. Sierra, who had married him for his position and prospects, found herself bound to an increasingly unstable man. Their arguments could be heard throughout the castle, sharp words exchanged behind doors that weren't quite thick enough. Duke Aldrich spent more and more time in meetings, trying to salvage deals that kept falling apart. His legendary composure began to crack, moments of rage erupting that frightened even his closest allies. Only Duchess Helena seemed unaffected. She watched everything with calm, calculating eyes. She knew something was wrong. More than that, Kale suspected she knew who was behind it, but knowing and proving were 2 different things. And even she couldn't find someone who could literally become invisible by wearing another face. A year after his death, Kale finally made his first direct move against his family. It started with a letter, delivered anonymously to Damien's personal chambers. Inside was a single page, bearing words that made the young duke go pale. I know what you did at the Rift. I saw everything. Meet me at the old chapel at midnight if you want to keep your secret. There was no signature, no identifying marks. Damien had no way of knowing who had sent it or how they had learned the truth, but he couldn't take the risk of ignoring it. The old chapel was a ruined structure on the edge of the Ashford lands, abandoned decades ago after a fire had destroyed most of the roof. Only the stone walls remained, broken and covered in ivy, a skeleton of faith surrounded by wild forest. Damien arrived alone as instructed. His aura blazed around him like a protective shield, casting blue-white light across the ruins. He was ready for an ambush, ready for betrayal, ready for almost anything. What he wasn't ready for was the figure that stepped out of the shadows. A figure wearing his own face. Damien stumbled backward, his sword half drawn. The doppelganger smiled at him, and it was strange to see his own features twisted into such a cold expression. Brother, Kale said, his voice a perfect match for Damien's own. Did you miss me? Damien's face went through a rapid progression of emotions. Shock, horror, disbelief, and finally fear. Real, genuine fear, that's impossible, he whispered. You're dead. I killed you myself. I felt the blade go in. I watched you fall. Kale let his face shift, rippling like water disturbed by a stone. His original features emerged, older now, harder, marked by months of training and conflict. Death, he said calmly, wasn't willing to keep me. What followed was not a battle. It was an execution. Damien was powerful, enhanced by years of training and natural aura ability. But Kale had something Damien didn't. He had absorbed the skills of a dozen master warriors, each one a legend in their own right. He had the knowledge of how Damien fought, stolen from the guard captain who had trained him. He knew every move before it was made, every habit and tendency that Damien had developed over years of practice. More importantly, he wanted it more. Damien's sword swings grew desperate, wild, losing the precision that had made him formidable. Kale deflected each one with mechanical precision, barely moving, conserving his energy while his brother exhausted himself. Then he counterattacked with techniques Damien had never seen. A blade saint's fluid strikes, flowing from one attack to the next without pause. An assassin's vital point targeting, each blow aimed at joints and nerve clusters. A mage's enhancement of speed and strength, borrowed from an understanding of aura that his family had spent years denying him. It was over in minutes. Damien lay on the chapel's broken floor, His sword arm shattered in 3 places, his aura depleted, blood pooling from wounds that would have killed any normal man. He stared up at the brother he had murdered, and in his eyes was the look of a man confronting his own mortality. "Please," he gasped. "Please, I'll give you anything. Money, land, the duchy itself. Just let me live." Kale crouched beside him, studying the face he had grown up alongside. The face of his betrayer. The face of his murderer. "Do you remember what you said to me?" asked. "The rift?" Kale asked softly. "You said I was nothing but a mistake. A stain on our family's legacy. You said I was going to be the tragic hero who died fighting the Void Walker." Damien's eyes widened further. "No, please, I didn't mean it. I was just angry. Kale continued, ignoring the desperate interruption. "You also said I was never supposed to have anything. But here's the thing, brother. You were right about one thing. I am going to be a hero." He leaned closer. "I'm going to be the hero who exposed the corruption of the Ashford family, who revealed how they murdered their own son, who brought justice to those they wronged, and you're going to help me. What? What do you mean?" Kale's face began to shift again, rippling and reforming until Damien's features stared back at him. "From a different body, Kale said with his brother's voice that Damien Ashford is going to confess to everything. He's going to reveal every crime, every betrayal, every murder, and then he's going to disappear forever. But don't worry. The name will live on. I'll take good care of it." Damien screamed then, a sound of absolute terror and despair that echoed through the ruined chapel, but there was no one to hear. No one to save him. Kale touched his brother's face one last time, absorbing every detail, every memory, every skill that Damien possessed. Then he silenced him permanently, when dawn broke. Over Blackstone Keep, Damien Ashford walked through its gates with a troubled expression on his face. He went directly to his father's study and requested an urgent private meeting. What transpired in that room over the next hour changed everything. Damien, or rather the being wearing Damien's face, told his father that he could no longer live with the guilt. He confessed to Kale's murder, speaking with the weight of genuine remorse. He revealed the conspiracy to suppress the Mark of 1,000 Faces, the 23 years of poisoning that had kept his brother powerless. He exposed his mother's connections to the Midnight Serpents, the contract that had brought her into the family. He provided evidence, carefully accumulated over months, of financial crimes and political manipulations that violated imperial law. Duke Aldrich tried to silence him. He threatened, then begged, then threatened again. But by then it was too late. Kale had already sent copies of the evidence to the Emperor, to rival noble houses, to newspapers throughout the capital. The confession was merely the final nail in a coffin that had been carefully constructed over a year of patient work. The fall of House Ashford was spectacular. Imperial investigators descended on Blackstone Keep within days, armed with warrants and the authority of the Emperor himself. They found evidence of crimes that spanned decades, violations of every law that protected the common people, betrayals of the oaths that nobles swore to uphold. Duke Aldrich was arrested, tried in a public proceeding that captivated the entire empire, and executed for treason. His death was not quick or painless. Duchess Helena attempted to flee, using skills from her former life to evade capture. But she was captured by her former allies in the Midnight Serpents, who had been paid handsomely to betray her. Kale had made sure they understood the alternative. She died in a small room beneath the capital, surrounded by the people she had once called comrades, paying for a lifetime of murder with a death that took 3 days. Sierra, the beautiful bride, who had been party to murder, found herself stripped of her titles and properties. The scandal of her involvement in Kale's death made her a pariah, rejected by the very social circles she had spent her life cultivating. She died in poverty 3 years later, alone and forgotten, succumbing to a wasting illness that no healer would treat. And Damien Ashford, the young duke who had mysteriously disappeared after delivering his devastating confession, was never seen again. The Emperor, impressed by the detailed evidence that had been provided and eager to appear as a champion of justice, ordered a thorough investigation into Kale Ashford's death. The findings were damning beyond anything the public had imagined. It was revealed that Kale had been the true hero of the Voidwalker encounter, that his blow had been the one that weakened the creature enough to be killed, that his family had murdered him to prevent the awakening of his birthright abilities that had been suppressed through years of systematic poisoning. A statue was erected in the capital, depicting Kale in heroic pose, sword raised against an imaginary foe. Memorial services were held throughout the empire. Songs were written, plays were performed, and the man who had been called worthless his entire life was finally recognized in death as something remarkable. The irony was not lost on Kale, who watched the dedication ceremony from the crowd wearing the face of an unremarkable merchant, but justice for the dead was not enough. Kale had larger plans. In the power vacuum left by the Ashford's fall, he saw opportunity. Wearing various faces, using identities he had cultivated over years, he began to manipulate the succession of the Eastern Territories. He ensured that competent administrators took power, people who would actually care for the commoners who had suffered under his family's rule. He blocked corrupt nobles who sought to take advantage of the chaos. He guided the selection of new guardians for the Abyssal Rift, choosing warriors who would take the duty seriously. He didn't want to rule himself. That had never been his goal. He wanted something more subtle, more lasting. He wanted to reshape the empire itself, to eliminate the corruption and cruelty that had allowed his family to flourish for generations. It took decades. Patient, careful work spanning an entire lifetime. Kale wore thousands of faces, played countless roles, touched the levers of power in ways that no one could trace or resist. He exposed corrupt officials, ensuring that evidence found its way to the right investigators at the right moments. He supported reformers, providing resources and protection when they needed it most. He eliminated those who couldn't be redeemed, wearing faces of trusted friends to reach places that no assassin could penetrate. By the time he finally grew old, truly old in a way that no transformation could disguise, the empire he had known as a young man was unrecognizable. Laws protected the common people from noble predation. Noble privilege had been curtailed, subjected to oversight and accountability that would have been unthinkable in his youth. The dark practices that had been normal when he was born were now crimes punishable by death. The mark of 1,000 faces was no longer spoken of in hushed, fearful tones. It was a legend, a story of a man who could become anyone and use that power to reshape the world for the better. Kale's final act was to walk to the edge of the Abyssal Rift, the place where his old life had ended and his new one had begun. The Voidwalker had long since been truly slain, its threat ended permanently by warriors Kale had helped train. The rift itself was smaller now, slowly closing as the energies that sustained it faded. What had once been a mile-wide scar across the land was now barely wider than a river. He stood at the edge, watching the darkness swirl below. He was wearing his original face, the one he had been born with, the one his family had tried so hard to destroy. It felt right to end as he had begun. Thank you, he whispered into the void, for giving me the chance to become what they feared. There was no response. The entity that had awakened him, whatever it had been, was long gone. Perhaps it had expended the last of its energy to create him. Perhaps it had simply moved on to other dimensions, other realms. It didn't matter. What mattered was what he had done with the gift he had been given. Kale Ashford, the man of 1,000 faces, stepped forward into the darkness. This time there was no betrayal, no pain, no screaming fall. Just peace, and somewhere in the depths of the abyss, the darkness welcomed him home. But the story doesn't quite end there. Because power like Kale's doesn't simply disappear. The mark of 1,000 faces is a bloodline ability. And while Kale never had children of his own, there were distant relatives, branches of the family tree that had been forgotten or dismissed. 300 years later, in an empire transformed by Kale's decades of work, a young woman named Lyra woke in a hospital bed after nearly dying in an accident. She felt strange, different, powerful. When she looked in the mirror, she saw her own face begin to shift. Somewhere, in the cosmic darkness between worlds, something laughed with satisfaction. The legacy continues. And that, my friends, is where our story ends for now. A tale of betrayal so complete that it destroyed a man entirely. And of revenge so perfect that it reshaped a world. Remember, the greatest weapon isn't a sword or a spell. It's the ability to become anyone, to be everywhere, to strike from faces that no one suspects. If you enjoyed this journey through the shadows of revenge and transformation, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below telling me what you thought of Kale's revenge. Was it justified? Would you have done the same? I want to hear your thoughts. And stay tuned for the next video, where we'll explore another incredible story of power, betrayal, and ultimate retribution. Until then, stay sharp, stay suspicious, and remember, the person standing next to you might not be who they appear to be. This has been your host, and I'll see you in the shadows.